His enemies sealed the tomb with the guard of Rome. The mission was simple: to ensure that a dead man remained dead. But the body was not there. The story of the resurrection is a puzzle, a cold case, with 4 eyewitness reports that at first glance seem to contradict one another. If this were a modern court case, any skilled defense attorney could sow the seeds of doubt. Think about it. The Gospel of Matthew says Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to the tomb. Mark says it was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. Luke mentions Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them. John mentions only Mary Magdalene alone. Who arrived first? And what did they see? Matthew describes an earthquake and an angel whose face was like lightning descending from heaven and rolling away the stone. The guards trembled and became like dead men. Mark speaks of a young man dressed in white sitting inside the tomb. Luke describes 2 men in gleaming clothes who suddenly appeared beside them. John mentions no angels at first, only the stone rolled away. 1 angel or 2? Outside or inside the tomb? An earthquake or a sepulchral silence? The instructions given also vary. In Matthew, the angel tells the women to go and tell the disciples that Jesus will meet them in Galilee. In Mark, the message is the same, but the gospel ends abruptly, saying the women fled and said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. In Luke, the angels remind the women of Jesus' own words about his death and resurrection, with no mention of Galilee. These are not minor variations. They are fundamental differences at the heart of the most important event in the Christian faith. For centuries, skeptics have pointed to these discrepancies as proof that the story was fabricated, a poorly stitched together legend. And honestly, their objection carries weight. How can we trust a story whose main accounts can't seem to agree on the basic facts? But what if the contradictions aren't a weakness? What if they are in fact the key to understanding what really happened on that Sunday morning? To unravel this mystery, we can't begin on Sunday. We need to go back to the darkness of Friday, to the silence of Saturday, and to the absolute despair of Jesus' followers. Friday, the air in Jerusalem was heavy with the smell of blood, vinegar, and defeat. For the disciples, their world had ended. The man they believed to be the Messiah, the liberator of Israel, was dead, executed in the most humiliating and brutal way the Roman Empire could devise. They were not expecting a resurrection. They were in hiding, terrified. The text of Luke, chapter 22, verses 61 and 62, gives us a glimpse of this despair. After denying Jesus 3 times, Peter's eyes meet his, and the text says that Peter went outside and wept bitterly. This was not the cry of someone expecting a miraculous turn of events in 3 days. It was the cry of guilt, of shame, and of crushed hope. They had abandoned their master. They had fled. The cause was lost. Then came the Sabbath. According to Jewish law, from sunset on Friday to sunset on Saturday, no work could be done. This included preparing a body for proper burial. Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin, bravely asked Pilate for the body of Jesus, as we read in Mark 15:43. He and Nicodemus hastily wrapped the body in linen cloths with spices and placed it in a new tomb carved out of the rock. A great stone was rolled to seal the entrance. But the story doesn't stop there. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27, verses 62 through 66, gives us a crucial detail. The chief priests and Pharisees, remembering Jesus' promise to rise on the 3rd day, went to Pilate. They feared the disciples would steal the body and declare a false resurrection. Pilate, impatient, answered, "You have a guard. Go, secure it as you see fit."
So the tomb was not just sealed, It was officially guarded by Roman soldiers. The Roman seal on the stone was a warning. To break this seal was to defy the authority of Rome, a crime punishable by death. The stage was set. The body was in a solid stone tomb. The entrance was blocked by a massive stone. The stone was sealed under imperial order, and an armed guard watched over the site. From a human perspective, it was the definitive end. No one was getting in. No one was getting out. The silence of that Sabbath was the silence of death. It is in this context of despair and maximum security that Sunday morning dawns, and it is here that our investigation into the apparent contradictions begins. Instead of viewing the four Gospels as a single unified report, let's treat them for what they are: four independent testimonies written by different authors for different audiences with different points of emphasis. Think of a traumatic, shocking event like a car crash. If you interview four witnesses, you'll get four different stories. One might focus on the sound of the crash, another on the speed of the cars, a third on the reaction of the people nearby, and the fourth on the details of the injuries. If all four stories were identical, word for word, you wouldn't think, how precise. You'd think they got their story straight. Variation is a sign of authenticity, not fraud. Let's apply this to the Gospels. John, the beloved disciple, writes the most intimate and personal account. He focuses on Mary Magdalene. For him, the story begins with one woman's grief. She goes to the tomb alone in the dark, driven by sorrow. She's not expecting a miracle. She's expecting to find a body to anoint. When she sees the stone removed, her first conclusion isn't "He is risen," but "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." John chapter 20, verse 2. It's a human, logical reaction. She thinks the tomb has been robbed. Luke, the physician and historian, is meticulous. He groups the women together and gives us a list. His focus is on the apostles' disbelief. When the women tell them what they saw, verse 11 of chapter 24 is brutally honest. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. Luke wants us to understand that the apostles themselves were the first skeptics. Mark, who likely wrote the first gospel, is direct and raw. His original account, which many scholars believe ends at Mark chapter 16, verse 8, is the most shocking. The women receive the news, but they flee in trembling and astonishment and say nothing to anyone. Why? Because the event was terrifying. It wasn't a calm, peaceful revelation. It was an encounter with the divine that shattered every category of reality. They were in shock. And Matthew? Matthew writes for a Jewish audience, emphasizing how Jesus fulfilled the prophecies. That's why his account is the most dramatic and apocalyptic. The earthquake, the angel like lightning, he's connecting the resurrection with the great theophanic events of the Old Testament, like the giving of the law on Mount Sinai. He's also the only one who mentions the guards to directly refute the accusation that the body was stolen. So the contradictions are not contradictions, they are perspectives. John focuses on the personal, Luke on the historical and skeptical, Mark on the raw shock, and Matthew on the theological. Together, they don't paint a confusing picture, but a three-dimensional, chaotic, and profoundly real one of an event that was beyond human comprehension. The real revelation, however, is not in harmonizing every small detail. It is in identifying the core facts upon which all four accounts, without any exception, agree. And when we do this, the mystery deepens. First, the tomb was empty. Every gospel, with its variations, begins with this non-negotiable premise. The stone was moved, and the body of Jesus was not there. This is remarkable because the tomb was a known location. If it were a hoax, The authorities could end Christianity on its first day by simply going to the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea and producing the body. They never did. Instead, as Matthew 28 reports, they bribed the guards to spread the story that the disciples stole the body while they slept, a story with a glaring logical flaw. If they were asleep, how did they know it was the disciples? Second, the first witnesses were women. In a first-century culture, both Jewish and Roman, the testimony of a woman in court was considered practically worthless. If you were inventing a story to be believable, you would make the heroes of the narrative, like Peter or John, the first to witness the empty tomb. The fact that all four Gospels insist that the women were first is what historians call the criterion of embarrassment. It's a detail so counterintuitive and socially awkward that it's far more likely to be true than an invention. They reported it that way because that is how it happened. Third, and most important, the disciples had real, physical encounters with the risen Jesus. This was not a vision, a ghost, or a grief-induced hallucination. Luke 24:39-43 is explicit. Jesus says, "See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And then he eats a piece of broiled fish in front of them. John reports the story of Thomas, who only believes after physically touching Jesus' wounds. They saw, heard, and touched him. But the most powerful evidence is not in the text, it's in the transformation of the disciples. On Friday, they were broken men, hiding behind locked doors for fear of the Jews, John 20:19. A few weeks later, these same men are in the streets of Jerusalem at Pentecost, boldly preaching that the same Jesus the authorities had killed was raised from the dead. This courage led them to prison, to torture, and for most of them to martyrdom. People might die for a lie they believe is true. No one dies for a lie they know is a lie. What could transform a group of terrified cowards into fearless martyrs? An empty tomb alone wouldn't do it. An empty tomb combined with personal encounters with the man they saw die, that changes everything. In the end, the puzzle of the resurrection leaves us not with a simple answer, but with an unavoidable question. It is not, do the stories contradict each other in the details, but rather, what best explains the core facts? We have a tomb that was undeniably empty. We have a group of demoralized followers who overnight became the most courageous proclaimers of a message that challenged the Roman Empire and the religious authorities of their day. And we have the birth of a movement, the Church, that exploded out of Jerusalem and changed the course of human history, all based on the belief that one man defeated death. The alternative theories, the stolen body, the swoon on the cross, mass hallucinations, all struggle to explain the combination of these facts. They don't explain the transformation of the disciples. They don't explain why the women were the first witnesses, and they don't explain why the authorities simply produced the body. Perhaps the confusion and chaos of the gospel accounts are the point. The resurrection is not presented as a neat and orderly event. It is a violent collision between heaven and earth, a moment that broke reality as we know it. The witnesses were not reporting a common occurrence. They were trying to put into words the unthinkable. Their stammering, overlapping accounts, filled with raw human emotion, may be, in the end, the most compelling evidence of all.
The story does not end with an empty tomb, but with a question that echoes to this day in each of us. And that question leads us to investigate other mysteries, like the fate of the man who authorized the crucifixion, Pontius Pilate, whose life was forever marked by that encounter. But that is another investigation.